Hello and welcome to our program, Where God Weeps, a program where we talk about the situation of the suffering church around the world. Today we're going to be considering the country of South Africa. One of the most racially mixed countries in Africa, it has officially 11 languages enshrined in the Constitution. Catholics number only 3.3 million and so are a minority, however have a great social impact. To tell us more, it is my very great privilege to welcome His Excellency Bishop Dabula Mpako, the Bishop of the Queenstown Diocese in South Africa. Welcome, Your Excellency, and thank you for being with us here today in our program.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for inviting me.
Your Excellency, you were born on the Eastern Cape in a rural environment. Can you tell us, maybe just to give the viewers, those who are with us today in our program, a picture of your growing up, your youth experience, if you will?
Well, I grew up in what I would describe as a semi-urban area, not typically rural, because we grew up in the small towns in the Eastern Cape. My early childhood years were lived near the town of Mthatha, an experience of growing up in what was the black middle class, if you like, because both my parents were teachers. So though we couldn't live in the town itself, we were allowed to come close enough to see what was happening.
How many were you, and would you say, did you have a traditionally Catholic upbringing, or how was your upbringing?
Well, I come from a family of 8 children.
What number are you?
I'm number 6. And we were an Anglican family when I grew up. As a matter of fact, my father, who had been a teacher all throughout his life, at his retirement became an ordained Anglican priest and died as an Anglican priest. It was only when I was 17 or so that I came into contact with the Catholic Church.
I wanted to ask you, how did you come in contact with the Catholic faith?
Well, it was by accident rather than by design, because at that time I happened to be in need of getting a formal identity document, and I needed to have a birth certificate to be able to access this identity document. In the case of not having a birth certificate, a baptismal certificate would suffice. And so I ended up looking around for a church that would issue a baptismal certificate, and I landed in the Catholic Church, joined the Catholic Church, got my baptismal certificate, and the rest is history.
The rest is history. What was the reaction of your parents when you came home and said, I've been baptized a Catholic?
Well, in fact, my mother and 4 of my siblings joined the Catholic Church together. It was, in fact, my mother who went looking around for a church that could welcome us.
So on that side, was there a problem for your father?
Well, at that time, my parents were not living together, in fact. My father was in another town, and we're living with my mother, in fact, in Natal. We moved from Eastern Cape to Natal.
When would you say that you had your first real experience of God, that is, you felt, yes, there was something there, perhaps even a vocation, and what would you say was the decisive moment in that process?
Some people speak of a conversion experience. I think at the age of 18, I had something along those lines.
What happened?
I suppose I was, at the time, a teenager, experimenting with many things, but there came a time when these things were just not fulfilling anymore. I felt I was longing for something deeper, something more meaningful, and it's as if something was beckoning me, in fact. And so that's how I stopped smoking, for instance. For a while, I gave up drinking alcohol. So it was a conversion experience, really, which then took me, or rather deepened my commitment to the Catholic Church. Because remember, initially, It was just for the purpose of getting a baptismal certificate.
Was there one person or event that was decisive in your vocation then to the priesthood?
I think the parish priest at the time, played a very crucial role in influencing me to begin thinking about being a priest. He was a very humble fellow, very nice and very kind.
And you thought, I want to be like him?
Yeah. In fact, that's exactly what I thought, because coming from the Anglican Church, I didn't know much about Catholic priesthood. So when I went to him, in fact, I just said, look, I want to be something like you. And when he asked me, do you want to be a diocesan or a religious? I said, that doesn't make any sense to me. I just want to be something like you.
I want to turn a little bit now to the country of South Africa. The country, of course, is very wealthy. It has gold, diamonds, minerals. It's very wealthy in terms of its natural resources. Can you tell us a little bit about the new growth of South Africa? You, of course, have lived a tremendous period of change, the pre-apartheid, the apartheid now, the post-apartheid. Can you tell us about this new South Africa and the optimism of this new country?
Well, on one level, there's been a positive change since 1994. There is definitely political freedom now. People feel free, to move around as they wish. I mean, there is democracy. We've had elections that were considered free and fair a number of times now since 1994. So there is a sense of freedom that everyone is having now in the country. And also, especially among the young, there is significant racial integration, especially those who are sort of middle class, who go to the sort of English medium schools. There, blacks and whites, intermingle freely. So that's a very positive thing. So on the positive side, there are some positive developments. However, there are also things that still need to be attended to.
Yes, I wanted to touch on this because illiteracy and unemployment both stand at about 40%, and 8 million predominantly black Africans are homeless. What is the shadow side? Is the country failing in many regards? You have this, on one side, this growth, but is there an increasing, wealth gap?
Well, we are told that South Africa is the most unequal society in the world at this time. So there is definitely that gap in terms of wealth. But keep in mind that the black majority were disadvantaged, for decades. So there was underdevelopment for decades. Even though the present government, has tried, to develop black people by building new houses and then electricity and water. But there is a lot that still remains to be done.
So, if you will, it's from a very, very low base that the country has to be built up, and that's the challenge.
Exactly, that's the challenge. But what's happening now is that people are becoming impatient because we are moving towards 20 years now since, the new dispensation. But many black people, in fact, their situation has not significantly changed at all. And so what we are experiencing now almost every day is so-called delivery protests, where people go out on the streets and burn tires, and because they are protesting against the slow pace of new houses built for people who have been on the waiting list for years and years, and some still don't have electricity and all that. So there is also a lot that still needs to be done. Many black people are still very much poor, and many say their situation has not changed at all since the new dispensation.
Is there a danger that this resentment of the wealth gap, that they see that their situation hasn't changed, but for a certain elite it has changed very positively? Is there a danger that these protests can spill over and become something more dramatic and problematic for the country as a whole?
There's a real danger of that happening, and in fact we are beginning to see maybe the beginnings of that, because as I say, before I came here, it was almost a daily occurrence in the different parts of the country that people go out on the street and barricade streets, and the complaint is the same, that there's no service delivery. And also some do talk about the fact that a few have enriched themselves.
I want to touch on this question because Archbishop Buti of Johannesburg made a statement which I would like to quote to you. He's president of the South African Bishops' Conference, stated that South Africa is developing a democracy that is politically stable but fragile, characterized by graft, violent crimes and corruption. How bad, if you will, is the corruption? How bad is this question of graft? And what can the Church do, if anything, in this problem?
The corruption is really a developing problem. It seems there's a culture of greed and selfishness that has set in, even in the ruling party, in many of our politicians. Violence is a problem. Violent crime is becoming a serious problem. I think there's a lot of anger, in South Africans, that you can see, among other things, shown through road rage. People, appear to be always simmering in anger, all the time. So that is true, the observation made by Archbishop Buti. However, what we've done now as church, coincidentally, last month we had our plenary session, and we had 2 days of reflection where we're asking ourselves precisely this question: how can we intervene in a positive way and have a positive impact in our society? And so some of the things we named were, for instance, regaining our prophetic voice as church and begin to talk to these, issues, and also to be a critical voice. And that calls, among other things, the government to fulfill its social responsibility. There's also the question of healing from, the wounds of our past, because we are realizing now that after 1994, maybe we focused on reconciliation, and maybe we needed to, but maybe we glossed over the need to deal with the deep-rooted,
So without justice, without true justice, there cannot be really any true peace.
That's what we are beginning to realize now, because there is a backlash, if anything, so that recently there was even a conference called by the different political parties on social cohesion, which again attests to the fact that we are realizing that there's even more division now because justice issues were glossed over. We needed to focus on reconciliation, but we also needed to deal decisively with justice issues, and I think that is something that we neglected.
I want to turn the page and talk another challenge, a big challenge confronting South Africa is HIV/AIDS. According to statistics, South Africa is, of course, one of the world's highest, if not the world's highest, population of infected people with HIV/AIDS, with an approximate estimation of some 1,000 people dying every day of the illness. My question to you is, do you confront this? How do you confront this? And how do you answer this enormous social and human challenge?
HIV and AIDS is a big problem in South Africa, but the good news is that, in fact, the church is one of the organizations in the forefront in the fight against HIV and AIDS. Most of the projects and activities are run by and through the Catholic Church. So there, I think we are doing a good job, and that is recognized by all in society.
Your Excellency, we're going to take a break, and we're going to watch now a short report on the story of HIV/AIDS in South Africa.
My name is Hugh Slattery. I'm an Irish missionary of the Sacred Heart. I've been Bishop of Zanin Diocese since 1984. This diocese is in the province of Limpopo, the northeastern corner of South Africa. We have the most people in the world living with AIDS here in South Africa. We're over 6 million at the moment, which is a purely shocking figure, actually, out of about 45 million people.
ka morago ga lekgola monna wa ka ke ile ka pelo ya ka ile ya ba bothoko kudu-kudu ke ile ka kopotsa gore ke mafelelo a bophelo ke ile ka kopotsa gore nka se ka kgona go phela go ya pele ene nka se kgone go godisa bana ba ka mara ba family ya ka moabo monna ka ba ile ba nkuka ba kgona go nthusa ka tse dingwe tse bana ba ka ba swantse gore ba dinyakwa tša bana ba ka le tša family ya ka ke ile ka ba le manaba a mantši a mangwe a gore swantse ke re ke tswe ka mogare ga ntlo mara ke ile ka rapela gore modimo a nthuse ke fenye mathata ka moka ona a tang ka morago ga legola monna wa ka.
In the beginning, it sounded a bit funny because when we spoke about AIDS, people misinterpreted it and said so many funny things about it. I remember, young people, when we spoke about AIDS, they used to laugh.
Amen.
2 months ago, we buried 3 teachers, a doctor and a lawyer. All the and a nurse in the village up there. Now they're opening graves 4 and 5 at a time. So it's a huge problem. And the people are in denial. They don't want to talk about it. But there's so many dying and so many funerals. Well, they'll have to begin to talk about it, and to do something about it.
I see HIV/AIDS as a fire out of control. The figures back that up for South Africa. There's no doubt, or at least in sub-Saharan Africa, with 60% of the world's AIDS cases so far counted. It's an enormous burden. So I think it is a fire out of control.
Even though her life was short, we come together to pray and to give her a Christian burial because of her faith. Our sister Tinyiko today, like many other young people, are living life very early. And we all seem helpless as we watch sickness taking the young lives of many people.
Ndiyalwala achina buchiro habude. Haba bana abanengwe badaduba lingwe na lingwe bachidisa zitabe. Ene ndi mutu wenda felelwa nga bana. Haba bana abanengwe bari arichi siwa nani. Ndo felwa nga bana bote. Ndo salana ziduru zwene Yesu zitukupezi. Haba mudeni. Ndi madrumbali mara abanengu dapa mashikani azingurube musibo dabana haba ndi pfandi sichahumbula nabana banga haba bararu bofaho bosi abana ndi pfandi chihumbula bana haba duba limwe na limwe vanoda vachimpa ziliwa zwa Yesu Kriste unga ovambiwa chipambanoni achivambelwa nne.
We're a deeply wounded country, I think, and it's important to keep that in mind. All races here have been affected by our past history, and AIDS came so quickly after the transition. It really came in a very, very big way, this whole AIDS pandemic, and has kind of shocked people from the past. We're trying to recover from apartheid, ravages and pain, and suddenly this hits.
The type of life that most people lead here has changed tremendously. You know, of now lately we have a lot of, kids drinking.
That most of them are involved in that, they go around in shebeens drinking. So in most occasions when that happens, because that's when they lose the control of themselves.
We no longer have that peaceful life that we used to have in the beginning because of this drinking habit of the kids. There are a lot of beer outlets, say shebeens and taverns. The core problem is a lack of guidance from the parents. Our parents hardly have time for their kids. They hardly guide them, especially on sex. It is taboo in our culture for the parents to talk about sex with their kids.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to our program Where God Weeps. It is my very great privilege to be speaking again here with Bishop Dabula Mpako, the Bishop of Queenstown, South Africa. And we've been talking about the situation of the church, the situation of society, the growing rage, and mostly now about the question of HIV/AIDS and the church response to this challenge. Your Excellency, thank you for being again with us here on our program. We've been speaking about AIDS and the challenge for society, and some of the proposed solutions have been, of course, the condom solution has been widely spread in South Africa, and yet infection rates continue to soar at about 22%. Has the condom been an effective solution to the problem? And if not, why not?
Well, I think the observation you just made now underscores the fact that the use of condoms can never be the ultimate solution to the problem of HIV and AIDS. I think we need to go deeper than that and begin to address the values that people live by and also the way people behave. And so in the church, for instance, we've taken on this Education for Life program in many of our dioceses where we are trying to help young people especially deal with the question of their behavior.
A question to you is, this whole condom program has been more or less imposed from outside, from international NGOs and international governments. Is there not a certain arrogance that comes with this imposition of cultural values that are perhaps foreign even to traditional African values? I
would say more than a question of direct imposition, I think this really is a result of this globalization phenomenon, which leads to cultural disintegration. And this morning we were just talking about that, and one of the bishops was saying, for instance, we are in a place of no culture, in the sense that our cultures have been so influenced, by this globalization phenomenon that people now go for anything that they see. So I would say it's more the influence of the globalization. People see you on TV. I mean, the movies they watch are all from America. So people get influenced by that. So I think that what is important really for us is not so much to hark back to what was culture before, which cannot be resuscitated now in many cases, but to help people now to discern and have a critical mind, so that they choose well.
I have two questions for you in this regard, and one is that you have mentioned that there is no culture at the moment. That is that, if I understand correctly, the African traditional culture has been or is being left behind, but the new culture that is materialism, perhaps secularization, is not a culture. It is in fact void of any value other than self-benefit. If the church doesn't step in and say, look, we've lost this value, we've lost this cultural value, the one that is being imposed on us or that we are taking on has no value, and what is the future then?
I think that is one of the greatest challenges facing us, developing a new culture of life, that takes certain aspects of our traditional cultures, but that is also open, to the new culture, because its influence is unavoidable.
Your Excellency, for those who are with us today in our program, what would you say are your greatest needs? Where can those, or let's say, for what can those people who are with us today help, either in prayer or through perhaps concrete action?
I would say two things really. The greatest challenge facing us as church in South Africa now is to become a self-reliant church, self-supportive in terms of material support, self-evangelizing and self-ministering. And there needs to be a sense of belonging to the church developed among the people, because many of them still do not have that sense of ownership of the church. Talking about the HIV and AIDS projects, I think one of the greatest needs is that we need to be adequately capacitated to be able to continue with these projects. Because it was reported in our January plenary session that some of the funding agencies which have traditionally funded us had indicated that they would cease giving their funding. So we need partners, to join hands with us in combating this scourge of HIV and AIDS.
Your Excellency, thank you for having been with us today in our program.
You're most welcome.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for having been with us today on Where God Weeps. And if you'd like to know more about the situation of Catholics in South Africa, or perhaps how you might be able to help through your prayer or concrete action, I would encourage you to look at the contact information at the end of this program. And we look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.